meeting is being recorded. Recording is in progress indeed. All right, thanks, Alexa. All right, let me just close some things down so I don't burn too much computer power here. Oh, come on, sometime today. There we are. There we are. And let me silence my email. All right. Where'd you go? There you go. All right. Sorry. Trying to figure out what happened to Windows here. All right. So let me just reposition this really quickly here. Okay. And like I said, I might not necessarily see, I might have your mugshots covered up. I definitely don't have the chat. It disappears after a while in this interface for me. So if you need me to stop, you need me to pause, you need me to repeat something, or my internet connection stuttered and you didn't quite catch what happened, just shout, okay? But let's see here. What do we have? All right, there's my cursor. Rhino 7. Come on now. There's the planar composition example I had the other day. See, I'm just going to quickly throw something together here based on my parts and pieces. If I had really been thoughtful, I probably could have done that ahead of time, but just not enough time in the day, is there? I know you guys understand that. Preaching to the choir. All right. And half my life seems to be waiting around on my technology to do things for me. Let's see. Come on, open. There we are. I knew it wanted to open. Just need a little coaxing this morning. Sometime today. Here we are. All right. Believe it or not, Rhino is actually kind of light for a NURBS modeler, like as opposed to Maya and some of those other things. My keyboard still isn't working. That's going to be really annoying to not be able to pan with my keyboard. So anyway, let me actually just see if I have something pre-baked here, pre-cooked. Let's see, 712. Oh yeah, look at that. All right, so let's just try this. All right, yeah, different, isn't it? All right, so let me just restore this back to what it would look like here. Let's see, perspective. All right, so just as we talked about before, I have a perspective view, top view, front view, right view. I actually didn't draw a ground plane. I could, but I didn't. And I'm just going to go ahead and turn the top view to shaded as well, to sort of see what we have here. What's shaken. Oh, for some reason, it turned my front view shaded. What in the world? Is everybody's? Am I crazy? Why is it turning? Let's turn front view to shaded and see if that maybe turns top view to shaded. What the heck? All right, here we go. Just glitching on me today. I don't know. I think my computer is gaslighting me. Sometimes it. Yeah, interesting. It's also this was a hand-me-down. It was actually newer than the computer I'd been working on, but it came with like this battery issue. So at some point I need to like rip off the Band-Aid and just sort of say to the IT guy, like, I can just go a week without my laptop. If I hand this to you, can you get the battery replaced? Anyway. All right, so you can see I have some things lining up, some things I have purposely intersecting. Some things are flush. Yeah. So I'm not too concerned one way or the other there. I have some variable thickness here. So I made some things thicker than others. It looks like I made horizontal surfaces about twice as thick as the walls. Maybe in some cases, in other cases, not so much. I made some thinner surfaces as well. I don't know why I did that. It was a different course. So, but anyway, my shift key still isn't working. Oh well. Nevertheless, I will go on. I'm going to save this out on the desktop so I can and rename it so I know what it is later on. So I'll call this 767 axon summer 2023. Gosh, it's hard to believe it's 2023. All right. Okay. And so again, I'm just double clicking the labels to toggle back and forth between 4 views and 1 view for it, right? All right. So I've set things to shaded just so I can see the three-dimensionality a little better here. And let's talk about axons, right? How many of you guys know what axons or isometric drawings are? Cantrell does, Dina does, Bijan, of course, does. All right, so perfect. Now I get to test how much I remember from 2020 with annotating things in Zoom. Let's say draw in Zoom. Here we go. Of course, my mouse isn't going to work now because it's in Windows. What the heck? All right. So anyway, let me draw some lines here. So let's talk about projection just for a little bit here, right? So we have orthographic projections similar to the top, front, and right views. What that means is that everything's drawn to a certain scale, and it's an abstraction, right? It's not exactly how our eyeballs see things, but everything's drawn to the exact same scale, and everything that's sort of perpendicular to our eyes, our camera, appears on the same plane, right? All right, so let's talk about how our eyes see. That's called perspective or perspectival projection, right? So let's start with a very basic, oh dear, let's see here. Oh, no, that's too thick. And that seems a little too thin. But anyway, I'll start with 1 point, right? So 1 point perspective, for instance, then I thought I had a line here. Okay, here we go. Would then start to produce something like this, right? Remember my very first art class in junior high, we had to sit out in the hallway of the school with all these lockers and doorways. And with the tunnel vision, we'd sit in the middle of the hallway, we'd have these boards on our laps and we'd draw 1 point perspectives of the hallway, right? And so if we had a grid on the floor, it would look something like this. Of course, as things get closer to us, they get larger. As things get farther away, they get smaller. Everything that runs in the direction that we're looking recedes to 1 point, right? Everything that's vertical stays vertical. That's a typical 1 point perspective, right? 2 point perspective. Let me just clear that out. Yep, there we are. Let me try my best to draw a. Oh, sorry, it's because I'm drawing lines. Ugh, this is like the least intuitive drawing I've ever encountered. But anyway, what was my saying? A good craftsman never blames his crappy tools, right? Okay. Anyway, okay. Let's see here. And so this would actually be quite different, right? So this is largely, although maybe slightly different than how we see, but closer to how we see, right? So if we are not on axis, and our vantage point is not orthogonal or perpendicular or normal to the surfaces we're looking at, or parallel to the surfaces that we're looking at, then we get a 2 point perspective, right? So in this case, we might get a hallway. It looks like this. Try to line that up. So I'm lining out things up with depending on the direction they're going with the two vantage points, right? The two. Okay. All right, and so we might have, again, a grid on the floor. The ones going this way will go off to this point. I'm not doing a very good job of lining this up. Let's see here. Let me just start this over. This is really hard to do with a touchpad only. Like I have a mouse next to me and it will not work. Let me just unplug it and see if I can get it to, it's so annoying. Okay, of course not. All right, let me try this one more time here. Try to draw 2 points off in space here. Okay. I really want to grab this mouse and just start driving with that. All right, anyway. So I'll start drawing directly from the points. Right. So that would be a box off in 2-point perspective, right? Okay. If I was coming down further, right, I could draw a box that looks like this. Right, let's say. And so depending on, again, there's a horizon line here. Depending on my height relative to the horizon line, then I'm either up on a helicopter looking down like a bird's eye, or I'm at eye level, right? So if the eye level corresponds really closely to the lateral line connecting the two vanishing points, then we get something that's closer to eye level, right? Perspective, right? Something super tall would look like this then, right? Rather than being super short. Let me just try to clear this up. I'll just freehand with a different color. It might stick out a little more just so you can sort of see now that I have those guidelines, right? So here's at eye level looking up at a 4-story building off in the distance, etc. Right? Axon's slightly different. Right? There are no vanishing points. It's another abstraction that's sort of it's called paraline drawings, but it's sort of three-dimensional. But at the same time, there's sort of rules that follow the orthographic projection, right? So things are measured in particular ways. There's no foreshortening. There's no vanishing points. Things don't get smaller as they get further away. Everything sort of remains the same scale. You've seen these before, trust me. Particularly if you ever liked popular mechanics magazines and things like that, you'd see the cutaway of an engine, an axon, right? You get things like exploded axons where you have something sort of like pulled apart, all the pieces sort of exploded away. But basically, instead of having vanishing points, right? Let's say I have the same building here. Everything going in the same direction will be parallel, right? So those two lines would be parallel. These two vertical edges would be parallel, right? Going in that direction would also be parallel. This would be a 30-30, right? This is parallel to this, and this line that I'm drawing would be parallel to this one and this one, right? And so, I'm not quite being too rigorous here. All of these vertical lines would be vertical. And basically, everything, if you take this datum here, this horizontal datum, you measure these two angles, you can do a 30-30, you can do 45-45, you can do 30-60. There's plan obliques where you just basically take the plan and put it down and twist it, etc. Right? So by default, Rhino does 30-30s really easily. In fact, when you do an axon or an isometric projection in Rhino, it automatically goes to 30-30, right? We could do a 30-60, right? So this would be a 30-60. In which case, right angles would still look like right angles. So let me just draw the base. That makes sense? So
Can
it's
you
just a
repeat
little
that?
practice.
Oh, would you mind repeating that? The 30/60, what is the kind of the basis for that?
Okay, so I'm drawing this datum right here, horizontal at the bottom. One angle is 30, the other is 60.
Oh, got it. Okay,
Right.
thank you.
Okay. I only draw this. You won't actually want to put this on your drawings. If so, it'd be a light construction line. But that's the sort of datum that we look at. So you could do 45, 45, 30, 60, 30, 30. Those are pretty common ones, right? All right, does that help a little bit? All right. So let me just clear that. All right. Sound effects are always there. Let's see here. Oh, I forgot I have to turn off the zoom. Okay, here we go. Now I'm back in. Maybe I'm back in. Oh no, I have to, yikes. I have to tell Windows to actually find the optical magic mouse. Oh, come on, really? Oy. Now my mouse isn't working with either operating system. Oh no, it kind of is, but oh no. All right, well, I'm gonna try my best, nevertheless, to use just my touchpad. It's one of those days. Now something's just happening weird here. Okay, I'm in Mac side. Oh, now my Windows is acting up. Oh no! This cannot be happening. This is terrible. Come on, Windows. I Yeah, I can tell that that's not flashing. Oh boy. Everything works so well till I'm in front of you guys. So anyway, as you can see, the perspective is a perspective. These things aren't quite parallel, these edges, like let's say this one and this one and this one. But they actually do eventually all taper back to one common vantage point, one common vanishing point. It's the same thing with the lines, the edges going this way. Let me just see if I can kick this into pause. Okay, there we go. All right, Windows, behave yourself. Oh, it's just really not. Oh, I see. It's the mouse. Oh no. All right, here, let me just replug this stupid mouse in one more time. This is the weirdest thing I've ever encountered. And of course, this is being recorded on top of it all. So, there's that. Okay. So I'm back in Windows, and for whatever reason, my mouse is not working. Nor is my touchpad. Come on now. Something's happening. Ay, 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 ay. I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy, by the way. Like, this is like painful. I can imagine it's painful for you guys to watch this. Oh my gosh. What is going on here? Yeah, it's just my cursor not working. Okay, so I'm just gonna quickly shut down Windows and restart it. But this is my apologies for this. What in the world? This is not good because I need these tools. I use them all the time. Oh my gosh.
Josh, I've got a question. I'm sure
Sure.
it's going to be something that everyone else is dealing with. I mean, I've been using Rhino for a while now, but if I get into like an elevation or
Yep.
something, or even in plan, like if I've got several layers of things happening and I want to
Mhm.
move an object to another point, if it's not on the same plane, is there a way to move it to that point without changing planes? Is that where
Yeah, I can show you that. So you want to move it,
it's kind
like
of a
for instance, if you're
complicated
in top
question.
view, you'd want to move it X and Y, but without moving it in the Z.
Yes, but if that point that I'm finding is not on the same plane, sometimes it kind of jumps around.
Yeah, it'll snap directly to the point, even if because the point's on a different plane,
Yeah,
right?
it always
Yeah,
kind of
there's a way to
happens.
do that. You can set it to planar and you can say project, I believe. Let me just see if I can get my computer to work here. All right. Okay. Oh, that's a relief. Okay, take two. Sorry about that. For whatever reason, using the annotate tools in Zoom, like this is ridiculous what this is doing. I don't know. I've never had these problems before till now. Yeah, let me show you that. I can show you that on my example file too. All right, let's get this going. Hurry, right now. Like I say, it's definitely a relief to like be able to move my mouse around. It's for sure. All right, there's my Axon Summer 2023 file. So yeah, let's take a look at that. What I'm going to do is I'll try to identify something like that, and I'll try to move it in top view, but I'll also have my other 4 viewports open so we can see what it's doing simultaneously. So I'll start to move it in top view, and let's see if we can master the settings to sort of so you can figure that out. You could also use Gumball, but then you're not necessarily going to snap somewhere. So if snapping, like if Gumball, you have those sort of arrow axis handles to move things around, and you can move things very particularly on the whatever plane they're on. I never use Gumball. I've never, but it's there, and it can be useful for sure. Let's see.
And another way too is if you're using Gumball, if you move to a certain point, you can put the command fifth point, and then you can put it to the plane that you want to put it on after you snap it to that point.
Yeah. And Trail, you might show us that in a minute. Let's see. So
What's that command? Hit point?
Set point.
Set point. That's right.
So if I turn on planar and let's see, and I also have project on, then let's see here. I think I can move things around in this view, in top view, and I can snap, but it didn't change its plane. Right. So for instance, I'm snapping to a point down here. And moving it over here. Do you see what it's doing? And that's because
that one project toggle that I never really messed with.
yeah.
Wow.
So let me do this again. Here's another one that's hovering above the XY plane. Right. So when I snap here in the top view where my cursor is, do you see over in perspective that it's snapping in the XY, but in the Z, it's actually down on the construction plane? And so every time you're snapping to something in the top view or your ortho view, it's actually going to be in the Z direction in that same plane, right? So so I snap to this point, which obviously is up high, but now it's down below. It's projected back onto the projection plane. So everything will remain in the same plane when I do that. So that's it. There's lots of different ways to do that. If I turned on Gumball, right, this is what Contrell's talking about. He's mentioned Gumball a couple of times now over the last couple of days. But one of the things it does is it gives you all these handles for scaling, moving, and rotating. And so if I wanted to rotate in a particular axis, right, I just find the right one and I can do it. And I believe there's again, if you right click or you it'll put on like fields so you can actually type in an actual value if you wanted to, not just sort of eyeball things, right?
So does it kind of allow you to rotate an object without having to switch into different views?
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, once you get good with it. Yeah.
Okay.
So for instance, I could say
Just to make sure you're on the
23,
right axis.
right? So if I just click, but don't click and hold and drag, I just click on like one of these to move it. So I could move it, to right and Z. Or I could rotate this 90. Right. Okay.
Nathan, think of the gumball as instead of doing it without switching different views, doing it without having to use the command line.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Oh, got it. Okay. That makes sense.
But I mean, you can start to rotate and move things orthogonally pretty quickly just in perspective view. Whereas sometimes that can be difficult. You have to make sure ortho's on, and then you're not trying to, like the problems that Bijan has, where if you're trying to snap from one thing to the other, but there's lots of geometry, you might start snapping in weird places that you weren't anticipating, right? So yeah, it is one way to do that. Did that make sense? Did you guys see that? So when I turn on Gumball and select the geometry, you can actually click on those things and enter things in. All right, so axons, right? So by default, we have top, front, right, and perspective. In the perspective viewport, I'm going to go to the arrow here, and we've done this before. We've set things from wireframe or shaded, rendered, ghosted, X-ray. There's lots of different settings here that you can play around with. This one was called artistic. I actually kind of like Arctic, like a sort of white clay model render. Let's see. That's trying to give you some sort of hidden line drawing or line drawing. Let's see, Arctic does that. But you can also change the render settings, so that looks better. I'm going to go back to Ghosted really quickly. So those are the sort of viewport modes. But you can also change the orientation that the viewport's looking at, right? So if I go all the way down to set view, right, you can see that I can set any of these viewports to be top, bottom, left, right, front, back, perspective, 2-point perspective, or 4 different isometric views, so northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest, right? Okay. And then down here, there's something called named views, which once we start to deal with perspectives here in a bit, we'll start to move our camera around, we'll save a view, all our saved views will show up here as well. So that way you're not, once you get that camera positioned perfectly, you can save it. And that way, if you screw something up or you move away again, you can always go back to that particular viewpoint, right? So in this case, I'm going to look at the options for isometric. I'll start with northeast. And ta-da, there we go. Now it's an isometric or a parallel view, right? Again, parallel referring to the fact that all of the edges going in the different directions are parallel to each other, right? And that's because everything is scaled exactly the same way, right? So regardless of how close or far away it is from you, right? And if I manually drew a horizontal line here and then measure that angle, it'd be 30 degrees, and it'd be 30 degrees in this direction as well, right? So 30 degrees. And then basically this is just referring to the fact that I can look at it from the northeast or the northwest. I like the northeast direction. That was kind of nice. So I'll remember that. Maybe I'll go back to that. But I'm going to evaluate all of the different sides and sort of pick which one I think is most interesting. This one, you can see a little more detail of how this thing sprawls out in the landscape. It sort of looks more horizontal instead of vertical. Let's see here. Southwest again, looks more vertical, right? So the way this thing was spread out, the sort of length of it is sort of on axis with my vantage point with my camera. So I don't really have a horse in this race, except to say maybe I'll just pick one and go with it for a while. I like that one. Why not? All right, so that's just setting the viewport. You can see if I start to tumble, it'll maintain the parallel view, even if I change the, from like, let's say 30-30 to 30-60 or something like that, right? And so you just have to be careful. Once you do this, it's not a true 30-30. And then if everything else is 30-30 or everything's a different sort of axon, it looks really weird. So you want to just be very particular. If you accidentally mess that up, just go back here and set it to the isometric northeast again, in my case, right? Make sure that's that consistent 30-30 axon. Okay. All right, so from here, there's a number of different ways we could begin to produce some drawings, right? So that's the idea, is to produce some axonometric drawings. So first things first, what if we want to just get all of the lines, right? We want to make like some sort of line drawing. And then we can bring that into Illustrator. We can adjust some line weights. We can make some sort of really nice, gorgeous line drawing. All right, there's a tool for that in Rhino, and it's called Make 2D, M-A-K-E 2D, right? All one word. So if I just type that in, Make 2D, it's going to bring up a box. Well, first it's going to ask me, I'll just follow the command line, select objects to draw. So I'll go ahead and select, drag from left to right, and I'll make sure I have everything inside my selection box there. Just select everything all at once and hit enter once I'm done selecting everything. Told me there's 2 curves, 19 extrusions, right? It's going to bring me a box, 2D drawing options. So first of all, it's going to say, well, which viewport do you want us to like flatten out into a flat line drawing? And so I'm going to say the current parallel viewport, right? Not top, front, or right, because I think by default it'll pick the one that's active, that's highlighted, right? You can say view, that sounds good, right? And be interesting to see the C-plane, third angle, first angle. Let's go with view, right? So it's basically going to take what we see in the viewport and flatten that out into a drawing. Now, there's a number of different types of lines and things like that we can produce, right? And if you have something that's super complex, then sometimes you turn some of these things off. Right now, I have tangents lines, I have hidden lines, I have the scene silhouettes, and I have viewport rectangle all turned on. I'm going to leave them turned on. And I'm just going to simply hit OK. Let's just see what it produces, okay? Hit OK. Okay. It said time to make 2D was 3.29 seconds. Now in top view, I'm just going to zoom out. And for some reason, I can't see any of these things. Oop. What's it doing? Oh, I see. Sorry, I have to try to move the zoom interface out of the way. Okay, there we go. It's because I've done make 2Ds in here in this file before, of course. All right, so I'll turn that layer on. Let's see what we have here. Okay, you'll see I have a lot of different axons here. All right. So what it did is it actually put, again, let me just, it helps to see your faces sometimes because I can read your facial expressions, and if there's, some sort of painful look, like what the heck was that, then I can sort of read it. All right, so what you can see is that it gave me a set of drawings on this. In this case, there's 2 things. It puts it on the top view in the XY plane where Z equals 0, right? So it puts it on that typical construction plane, and it puts it in that positive X, positive Y quadrant, and puts that bottom left corner at the 0, 0, 0 point. Okay, so sometimes I work away from that 0, 0, 0 point when I know I'm going to be doing the make 2D. If I was going to do a series of make 2D drawings, then I would move this one. I would take it and move it carefully off to the side so that the next one will go, I know will go right here as well. What's interesting is that you'll see it also has an outline around it. That was the viewport window. So if I go back to that viewport, and what's interesting about that is sometimes what we'll do is we'll make a line drawing of that, of what we have in the viewport, Then we'll also make a rendering with soft shadows. And then what's nice about that is when we composite those two things together, the line work over the rendering, then having the viewport window helps us size things exactly right so they line up afterwards, right? So I'll show you guys that in a moment. But what I'm really interested in right now is just looking at this line drawing. And let's see what it produced. All right, so you'll see, maybe you'll see. Let me just move. It's so annoying. I have to move my mouse around here. Let's see, I'll move these over to the side here, to this side. So they're out of the way and I can go through the layers here with you guys. All right, so I have a make 2D layer and I have visible lines on a layer, scene silhouette curves on a layer, curves on a layer, viewport rectangle on a layer, hidden lines and things like that. So if I turn off the hidden lines, right, you can see I get mostly what I was going for. What's the scene silhouette? If I turn that off, what it's doing is it's supposed to give me the sort of outline around the drawing. So all the sort of edges that have air on one side and mass on the other. Typically, when we think about line weights, right, to give things visual hierarchy, we take that silhouette and we beef it up a bit so things really sort of pop, okay? So I'll talk about that in a moment. Let's just go through this. You can see that all of these different things, there's the viewport rectangle, I can turn that on and off, right? Okay. Now, what's interesting is if I turn off the scene silhouette, I turn off the hidden lines, right? One thing you might notice is that where we had surfaces just intersecting themselves, each other, we don't actually have those lines, like where two surfaces meet. And that's really annoying because it's not necessarily a surface edge. It just happens to be a place where two things intersect. So there are some limitations that make 2D. Okay. So one way to get around that, and I'm just going to very quickly and carefully, I'll just delete that make 2D. I'll go back here to my parallel view. All right. So one thing we can do is we can actually generate the lines, the line work in the model where all of these surfaces intersect, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say intersect. Sorry, now I need to move my Zoom interface back out of the way. Ugh. I know, sorry, this is such a pain. Here, let me just do that. Okay. Now let's get back into Rhino. All right, so I'm going to say intersect, right? So there's intersect, intersect self, intersect two sets. I'm just going to pick the intersect, right, as a command. I'm just going to select all of these things at once and just say, find where all of these intersections occur and draw lines where they do, all right? Okay, now I'm just going to do the make 2D again. I'll select everything in my model. Again, here, let's see, select the objects to draw. Okay. And I have tangent lines, hidden lines, scene silhouette, viewport. Okay, so once I make sure that there's nothing goofy there, I'll just hit okay. Let it generate things. Let's just take a look. I could again go back to top view. All right, and that time it did a little better of a job. Although for some reason there's a gap here. Sometimes you have to go back and audit your drawings, right? There's a gap here, which is interesting. I'm not sure why. And then sometimes the scene silhouette thing doesn't quite work, right? Okay. So I'm showing this to you because sometimes you really do need to bring out these vector drawings into Illustrator. Now let me show you a different way of doing this that you don't have to worry about the make 2D command, okay? Because we'll use both, the make 2D and then this other way, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to settings and I'm going to adjust some render settings, and then we can actually tell it to turn on edges, and we can even try to give it some silhouette definition and line weights just through the rendering, okay? Now what's interesting about or important about that is you won't be able to let's say later on in Illustrator, change the line weights again, unless you go back into Rhino and re-render it. So that there's some trade-offs back and forth with these things, I think you'll see. That'll start to make sense once we do this a couple of times. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the tools pull down. And this is, again, what I was talking about before. Where are the settings? The options, right? Tools pull down, options down at the bottom. And there are a number of different ways I can change these things. But one way is I'm going to go to view and display modes. And I can either change Arctic, which is kind of an interesting thing, or one of these others, or I think I can even create my own display mode. And one thing I'm going to point out is when I start to click through here, I can start to change lots of different settings, render settings. And if I suddenly mess something up and I don't like the way things look and I've just seemingly messed up Rhino, I can always come back here and say restore to defaults, and then I'll go right back to all the default settings. Okay, so I just want to make that really clear. Don't panic if something bad happens. But if I go to rendered, and I go to grid, and I go to objects, and I go to shadows, and I go to other settings, I can begin to change how my render settings, right? And I actually like Arctic as a starting point. And I can't remember, but I think there's a way to actually make your own. I think I actually called it last time sheer insanity. I think that's where this comes from. But I can't remember. There should be some way to like duplicate like any of these. Let's see if I can scroll down and find that. Display mode. All right, well, I'll look for that later, but I'm just gonna go into Arctic. And I'll just look at the settings here. So for instance, viewport settings, you can change what the background color looks like when you set things to Arctic mode, right? So in this case, I have a sort of solid color set to white, just want a blank field. You can change ground plane settings. So you could say, well, I don't want ground plane, or I do want ground plane. I just want shadows. You can change the altitude. So you can set a ground plane to be at that z=0 plane, or you can set it up to be higher or lower. You can, let's see, adjust output image, adjust gamma. You can say shade objects, right? So I'm going to leave a lot of these the same. And then visibility down here, you can say show certain edges, right? So maybe show ISO curves. ISO curves are the sort of grid inside the surface that you see sometimes. I'll leave that off. But I can say show tangent edges, so tangent seams, show sub-D geometry, show curves, show clipping planes. So I'm trying to sort of show edges here. Let's see here. I'll leave the GPU and the ambient occlusion on. I can go to grid. Okay, I can turn the grid off and turn everything else off. And go to objects. Let's see here. And I can tell whether I want to actually, so I can get really specific here, whether I wanted to show points or not, and how I want them to show them, and the size that I want them to show up as. I can do the same thing with curves. Color usage, the curve color, also its line weight. I can go to surfaces. I can also, again, let's see, edge curve usage, edge thickness, right? So I can change, here's something called naked edge. So when you look at naked edge, that's referring to an edge that doesn't have geometry on both sides of the edge, right? Like both sides of the line. So a naked edge is one that's on literally on an edge. It's like the scene silhouette. So we can actually change those settings and use separate settings for those and actually beef up their line weight. So we could say, well, I want the thickness to be 2 as opposed to 1 for the other line work, right? And so we can begin to adjust these things here. And like I said, every time I'm making a change in the settings, it highlights them in blue over here, so I can see what I've changed or where I've changed something. And if I suddenly messed up, I could say restore defaults, and then it goes back to no blue, and I've changed everything. Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at these settings where I've taken, I think, Arctic, and I've made my own called sheer insanity. So what I did is I changed the background to a solid color of white. Ground plane settings I turned off, and I turned off the shadows on the ground plane because I want something that's just floating. And And then I have shade, make sure I have shade objects, and I say color material usage, rendering materials. So in that case, if I set specific materials, they'll render as materials. And I say show curves, and I say show edges and show silhouettes, creases, intersections, etc. Right? So you can see that there's a number of different settings I have set here. If I go to grid, you can see those. And what I'm going to do after class is I'll go ahead and screenshot this if you want to like sort of look at these specifically and play around with them. You can always like start with that as a baseline if you want, and you can start to turn things on and off as you want, right? But I'll go ahead and provide that for you guys here in a bit. So here I have points. Let me look at curves. Yeah, so I have a curve width set as 1, sort of line weight of 1. Lines, clipping plane. I have clipping planes. This is clipping planes we'll talk about later. Let's see here. Other settings include view, display. Right. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit cancel. But now I'm going to go back to my parallel view. And one of my options, in addition to shaded, rendered, ghosted, X-ray, should be the sheer insanity, which is what I just called this silly render setting. Let's see what it looks like. It actually looks really dark. I suspect I know why. It's set to legacy Rhino render or regular Rhino render. Interesting. I don't know why that's looking that way. Except maybe I just want to start with Arctic and change things from there. So let me just go to Arctic. Come on. There we go. I hate it when I like make a stray sort of like selection. All right. So you can see what Arctic gives me by default. All right. So let's just do what I was where I was just at. Let's go and change some of these settings. Tools and options. All right. While we're recording these, I'm just going to go to view down at the very bottom, display modes. Here I'll find all those options. I can find Arctic. I'm just going to go through each of these one by one. Solid color white, I can turn off the ground plane, I can turn off shadows in the ground plane. Adjust input colors, shade objects. For some reason, it's set to custom material for all objects. I'll just say rendering material. All right, it's asking for, what do I want? Show ISO curves. So I have tangent edges, tangent seams on, show curves on. Okay. So I'm going to go to grid. I'm going to just double check that. I'll look at that. That's perfectly fine. I'm going to go to curves. I have a curve width or line weight set to 1. Use object's color. I'm just saying no, use a single color. I'm just going to set black as a single color for all curves that are shown. Okay, same with surfaces. So edge color usage and naked edge usage. Okay, so color, thickness. So I'm going to say use the object's color. No, I just want it to be a single color. And I'm going to say make it black. I'll give it a thickness of 1, right? Now you can see we're seeing the edges, right, drawn, right? Just like we have a line drawing, but also the rendering. Okay. Naked edge usage, it says use the surface edge settings. I'm going to say use separate settings. Now it should give me a set of separate settings. So I can I'll beef this up really large for a second. You can see, let's see here, use single color, make them black. There we go. And I'll tone that down to maybe like a 2 or something. Oh, not 20, not 32. That seems a bit extreme. Color reduction. ISO curve settings. I don't necessarily want to see the ISO curve, so I'll turn those to 0 as a line width. Okay. Sometimes the naked edges show up nicely and sometimes they don't. Like I'm not necessarily seeing them around this outline. So in this case, what I might do is do a scene silhouette and make 2D, and then also bring this out as a JPEG or a PNG, and I composite them together in Illustrator, right? So let me just double check some of these things. All right, there's Arctic. Shadows. And again, you can change the different types of shadows. Again, just do it sparingly and sort of double check to see what it does. Lighting, use lights. Okay, I'm not going to mess with that. Go ahead and hit OK. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead and select all of these things, right? And I'm going to, since we're dealing with rendering here, I'm going to go ahead and change the material, all right? So if you look, there's, again, several different ways you can access these settings. But if you look at the render pull down, you'll see render properties, right? That's where we get all the settings that I have over on the right-hand side of my screen. We have a material editor, we have an environmental editor, we have texture editors, okay? So you can always find them there and toggle them on and off if you don't have them docked over here. If you have them docked over here, this blue sphere that's sort of rendered blue, those are the render settings, okay? The paint tube, that's the material editor, shaders that I can use. I use the word term shader and material interchangeably, right? We typically call digital materials shaders. And let's see here. So if I go to the materials, I have all these things selected. I can make a new material by hitting the plus. Okay. If you don't see anything here, I mean, you can always look at these things, but I'm just going to say import from material library. By default, it's going to show you a list of go into a file directory in Windows where you can select certain things. Maybe I'll just go with white matte and see what that looks like as a default. Right. So what I'm doing is I'm loading in a material. Here it'll try to render it out so you can see kind of what it looks like, but it looks like just a white matte. Almost looks like something if it was cast out of plaster, right? I can right click it and say assign to objects, right? So I'm going to assign it to all the objects that I have selected at the moment. Okay. Hopefully. Assigned objects. All right, it's not changing, so that's weird. I wonder if it has anything to do with Arctic mode. Maybe I should just use a different mode and play around with that instead. This is what happens when I don't do this after a while. Create image material, select objects, assign to layers, assign to layer of objects. Yeah, I just want to assign it to the objects that are selected. But for whatever reason, Arctic mode isn't working. Let me just change that to regular. So if you just go to regular rendered mode, well, something's weird with my rendering. Rhino render. It's being responsive here. I don't understand. I have a skylight on, so just diffuse lights. Just have the pretty typical generic studio environments for reflections in sky. So let me go to my tools and my options, and let's just double check these things. Let's see, rendered. Do I have anything changed here? It's very odd. Restore defaults. Restore defaults. This is so odd because this is usually so easy. Okay, ghosted looks good, but why is rendered look so weird?
Should it appear like it did yesterday when it was kind of a white tone?
Yeah, it really should.
Yeah, that's what mine is doing too when I go rendered. The same thing yours is.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on here with my setup. Sometimes when this happens, what I'll do is I'll just export the geometry out to a new file that doesn't have all the baggage that this thing has, which again is pretty weird. So let me just do that. I'm just going to export this, export selected, and I'll make a new file.
Nathan, yours is looking just like Josh's, like kind of like metal, like gray metal.
Yeah, when I go into the rendered view, it was doing that. That was actually one of my questions I had for today, but it looks like it's happening with his too.
Huh, that's really
So
weird.
it has nothing to do with any settings that he's changed because yours is all default, right?
Correct. Yeah, I started to kind of try to see what was going on, but I didn't want to I didn't want to go down a rabbit hole in that and not be able to get back to the default setting.
Yeah. Hmm. Did it just export? Yeah, let's see. App data roaming right. Oh, I see. Export selected it. It exported it not to the desktop. That's weird. Okay, here we go. I was like, why can't I find this file? Oh, man, what could go wrong has gone wrong. That's really weird today. You ever have an off day? Like, oh, wow, what in the heck? Let's see. Open. No, don't save. I don't care. Here we go. All right, so we're just brought this geometry into the different file. And there it is. It's still rendering as such. Huh. I wonder why it's doing that.
Is it on Arctic mode as well, Josh?
It shouldn't be. Hmm. Hmm. There's something off with the lighting and the way it's actually handling lighting. And I'm not sure why, but you're saying, Nate, you're saying it looks like this as well on yours?
Yeah, when I was building mine out and going to the rendered view, it
Really?
was the exact same thing. Yeah.
Huh. Anybody else?
I've yet to see that. Mine's always white clay,
Yeah,
and
mine's, yeah, exactly.
Arctic mode just has like more shadows or more
Yeah.
shading on it.
I don't know what's going on with my, let me just open up a completely different file here. Nope. Yikes. Let's see. Sorry, let me go back to the original. Let's see, where's the desktop? No, don't diagnose, just go to the right thing. Here we go. Planar composition example. Like for instance, with these things that I extruded the other day, yesterday actually. Oh, wow. What is going on? Tools, options. Hmm. I'll have to take a look at this. I apologize. I don't know why this is not working all of a sudden. It's really, really weird. And I wonder if it has anything to do with my OpenGL. Ugh. Like if it doesn't like my graphics card, then
Nathan, if you render
oh,
yours
locked
right now, does
objects.
it look
Use
the
specific.
same?
Yeah, it does. It doesn't have the volume box around it because I removed that layer, but I turned the layer off, but when I turn it back on, it looks just like that.
And what about on Arctic mode for you?
Yeah, same thing. Yeah, it looks similar to that. Let me see if there's any like major difference between the two.
Hmm. Oof. Huh. All right. Well, let's do axons really quickly while we still have some time, because I don't know what's going on here, but it's not being very nice. And I'll do some digging into this right after class. But let's go with make 2D for now. So again, let me just go to sorry, that really threw me for a loop there. Let me just go back to the other demonstration file I had that actually has a full model here. I'm not sure what's going on here with my machine, but clearly something is off. And
Hey, I actually just typed something in to Google. Apparently this is an issue. Has to do with an update. People are on McNeil, they're talking about an update to where is it at here? Update to 6.19. Now all the shaded render views are weird dark gray black color.
is that for Rhino 7 though?
Update to V6.19.
Yeah, because we're
This is a
in
few
version
years ago,
7.
so
Yeah.
it's just the same. It's the only thing I can find that looks exactly the same as what you both have. So
What did it say?
system files, share the system files.
But Jean, do you have the same issue?
I don't, and I have yet to see this. But
Yeah, it's very odd.
I'm intrigued. It says we figured out what is causing the bug and have fixed and tested. We plan to release an update to the 6.19. In the meantime, you can work around this bug in 2 different ways. Rhino 6, start beginning a model. You can test run test toggle built in front facing. That's a long command. You need to run this each session.
So
it might be an update. It just might be an update that we got to do.
let's say, Nate, every time I close Rhino, I have an update to run. So I probably will do that. I don't know if you experienced that too.
I haven't, but I'll close it and see if there's an update to it.
Okay. Yeah, that might be it. Anyway, let's do make 2D real quick, and I'll show you how to take that into Illustrator. I'll do make 2D. I'll keep all this stuff. I'll keep the hidden lines just for fun and see what happens there. I'll hit OK. And let's see here. Let me go back to top view. In top view, I'll probably quickly here, let me go to layers. There we go. I'll probably just quickly audit the drawing, so to say, like look and see what's there and what's not showing up, and maybe fix a few things. So if I go around, let's see, I turn off hidden curves and I turn off the scene silhouette and the viewport rectangle, I can see that there's a few things not showing up here, unfortunately. And so, I mean, I can just manually draft this really quickly and probably just do that. And I'll turn on intersect. I have project and smart track on, so it's going to try to find this hypothetical intersection off here, off into space here, hopefully. No, okay, I guess not. Awesome. But so I can begin to do things like extend. And then trim. So extend, select the boundary object. So I'll extend it to there. Trim. I'll use this to trim that. I know that the edge here would be parallel to this edge. So I might just make a copy of this line right here. I type in the command extend or start to, and it'll automatically sense that I'm trying to do extend. I'm just looking at the instructions and the command line, select the boundary object, what you want to extend to, then the line that you want to extend. Oops. And then type in trim. I'll use this to trim that. Right. All right, so that cleaned up that one. And then there's, of course, there's this one over here. Copy. And I'll copy, again, I know everything's going to be parallel to that. So extend. I know that this needs to be a vertical edge. I'll turn on my ortho, make sure that it stays there. Go ahead and trim that away. I'll extend. Trim. Right. There are a few other places here that I would need to clean up. Right. But at this point, just for the sake of getting this in, I'm going to go ahead and select everything, including the viewport window rectangle. Turn that on. Okay. So I'm in top view again, looking at my Make 2D drawing. I'm going to go to File, Pull Down, and I'm just going to say Export Selected. Right. So I can again export all that stuff into another Rhino file. Actually, Rhino is a pretty good import-export tool. It does talks a lot of different languages here, so to say. So there's 3D Studio Max files, Adobe Illustrator file, which is what we're going to do. We're going to produce a native Illustrator file. There's different types of AutoCAD drawings, DWGs, DXFs, right, that are really common. There's STLs, there's OBJs, SATs, etc. Right? So there's all kinds of different types that it'll export out as. I'm just going to pick Adobe Illustrator. We'll just make a native Adobe Illustrator file, and I'll call this, let's see, I'll call this Axon 01. And I'll make sure I save it to the desktop that I can open it up onto, where I can open it up on Windows cannot access. Why can I not access the Mac side? Yeah, something's really weird with this. I'm going to, I don't know why this is being this way. It won't find the Mac side of things. There's something really wrong with however it updated my parallels. I might just try to start there. But anyway, I'll go ahead and save that. Go ahead and hit OK. Snapshot of current view. If I don't have a specific scale set, then I'll just leave that as snapshot and just hit OK. Okay. That'll produce an Illustrator file for me. Now, meanwhile, back in Illustrator, I can go ahead and open up that Illustrator file in Illustrator, which I'll do on the Mac side of things on my laptop. Sorry, this is like nothing is working right. It's really annoying. Really annoying. It has everything to do with whatever Parallels update I ran. But whatever happened, it broke the link between my Windows and finding the right drivers and hardware on my MacBook. Something's really off. That's why I was wondering if it was a video card thing. But if it's also happening on Nate's, then I suspect that's not the case. It's something else. Let's see here. Let me just find, let me just go to list. It'll be easier to organize things by type. November, October, grid test, delete me later, plain oblique. That's not the right one. Okay. Let's see if let's see if the Mac side can find the Windows side of things. Eesh. No, it wouldn't be there. Where would it be? I thought I actually had it on here. And of course I can't find it. Ugh. I got in the habit of like just saving everything on the Mac side, but if the Windows side can't find the Mac side, then it's like the chicken. This is a really big problem for me. Let me just open up one of these. Clearly this isn't the same axon drawing, right? But let me just open this up, and nevertheless you can sort of see what we're doing here. Just move out of the way just a bit here. So in Illustrator, it's similar to Rhino in that we have a toolbar on the left-hand side and we have some boxes on the right-hand side. I have things like properties, layers, stroke, swatches, color, etc. Right? If you don't see those, you can always go to the Windows pull down. You can toggle them on or off. So for instance, if I don't see something that I want, maybe I go to Windows and pull it over here, and then I can drag it over and dock it onto the side here, right? Or even better, where to go? I can just drag the tab over and dock it in here with, so I have different sort of color tabs, and I have properties tabs, layers tabs, etc. What you'll see is that in Illustrator, you have a set of layers that are similar to the layers you saw in Rhino. Okay. And so I'm going to turn off that background. But one of the things you'll notice is that you'll have all of these things. So you have, let's see, make 2D visible, make 2D viewport window, right? That's here. So I can turn some of these things on or off as needed. And then I can select them. I can go around and audit them. So for instance, I can select all of these all at once. And I can go to stroke. I don't know if you guys have stroke set on yours. Let me just go and say Workspace Essentials Classic. Right, so if I go to Windows Workspace Essentials Classic, it should have all these things over here for me. Right. That was Window, pull down, Workspace Essentials Classic. What that does, it gives me some settings along the top, and then depending on what I have selected here in Illustrator, it'll give me their properties, and I can start to change them. For instance, stroke, right? Stroke color or stroke weight. So right now it says it has no fill, which is perfect. Over here it says it has I have a fill color and a stroke color, like the outline. So I can say, well, I want to just use the stroke color. Then I can go to, I don't know why this is a separate box. What's it doing? Here we go. Sorry, I grabbed the wrong thing here. There we are. I'm just going to dock these things over on the right so I have them. Color, I could say I want them all to be black, or I want them all to be red. Right now I have red stroke, right? So I'm just using the cursor over here, selecting everything, right? And then I can toggle back and forth between a fill color and a stroke color. So the stroke color, or I can then go over here and set the color. I can start to select these things and change their line weights, right? So that's called stroke weight. I can beef them up, or I can turn them way down, right? I can go around and just select the scene silhouette, right? Oops. Again, this would be easier if I had my mouse working, but of course not. And actually change those to be a darker line weight, right? Okay, so for those of you not having issues with the rendering, if you'd like to try to render some axons out, try it, okay? Also try doing the Make 2D, right? And again, if you have some time between now and Studio, I can even troubleshoot any problems you're having in Studio. For those of you and the 3 of you in the Studio course. Sorry for all the mishaps today. I'm not sure what's going on, but I'm really anxious to actually, while this is happening, while we're talking about Illustrator, let me just close out Rhino and let it run the update. Do you want to install now? I'm just going to say yes. Let's see what that does.
I think once it gets done updating, it'll try to make you restart you.
Yeah, it'll ask you to restart Windows. Okay. So while that's going, and I'll just let that go. I mean, there's no reason for us to all watch this. Again, in Illustrator, I'm just going around and I'm just selecting some of these things. Sorry, let me just get rid of that so it's out of the way. I don't see layers over here. Here they are, actually. So you can see that the Essentials Classic, it sort of put everything that I think you would probably want to look at. Over here on the right-hand side, you can toggle certain things on and off, like let's say the stroke. Show options, there we go. So you can start to look at the weight. You can see how it, you can actually turn things into dashed lines. So for instance, if I go to layers and I turn on hidden lines, let's see if I have any hidden lines in here. I could always change certain lines to dashed lines. Let's go to stroke. I can go to dash line. You can see it's set to a certain dash gap ratio. I can always change that ratio. Let's say 4, maybe 2. Let it repeat, right? So I can make it more or less dense depending on what I want, right? So if I had some of those hidden lines, I could actually turn those into dashes if I wanted to actually see those. But I wanted to sort of tone them way down so that they're not too visually distracting, right? I can always change the line weights of these so that they're a little darker, right? The key is to make some rules, some simple rules that are consistent, right? In order to, as you go around with line weights and things like that. So line types. Yeah, so anyway. Sometimes you'll go around and you'll be like, oh, the scene silhouette didn't really get, well, in this case, it actually did. It's kind of nice. Just set that to 2. I could always just sit there and make my own lines that are going to be weight of 2 if it's easier just to simply draw. Just sit there and typically Illustrator by default has that sort of, again, that's smart detect. So you'll just, if you're careful and you're patient, you can just sort of snap to things. like I'm doing, it'll find the intersections for you to snap to. Okay. So there's more than one way to do these things, right? As I go around and try to clean these things up. All right. Interesting. So maybe it's done now. Let me see what Rhino 7 says here. Updating the toolbars, template files, training materials. So that's good. I'm just kind of curious to see what it does when I open it back up here. I didn't restart Windows, so there's that. Control warned me about that. But let me just start a new file, put a block in it, and set it to render and see if it made any difference or not. So that was a lot, and it was really disjointed, and I apologize that the workflow didn't really flow. At least it didn't for me. And I'm kind of mortified actually by how this morning has gone. So that's not good. But let me just test this out and see what happens here. Yeah, okay, so that's what it should look like by default, just in rendered mode, without doing anything, without lifting a finger. If I go to go to the tools and change those render options, I can then turn on things like the lines and curves and edges. So let me just do that. Let me go to View, Display Modes, and Rendered. And I can say, okay, the background, I'm just going to use the render settings for right now, ground plane settings, I'll just use those. So I'm not going to change too much here. I'll just scroll down and look and see if there's anything I want to change here. Show curves, I can do that. I can turn those off if I don't want to see any curves or points. I can go to the grid and I can say, I don't want to change anything there. I can go to surfaces and I can say edge color usage. Let's just use a single color. Now, if I set the line weight to be like 1 or 0.5 or something like that, it'll pop up. All right, so this is actually working the way it should. And for some reason, I had to just load the new Rhino update. I'm not sure why. I could say use separate settings for naked edges. I could say then, again, I want to use a single color and I'll make that color black. I can up those the line weight for the naked edges though. Although for some reason it doesn't seem to be single width for ISO curves. It's not really updating the edges here that I wanted it to, which is kind of odd. So I'm not sure what the deal is with that. Because it should make everything twice as large around that. Let's see, shadows, I'm just going to leave on. Other settings, I'll just leave because I don't want to necessarily mess anything up. For this, I'll set all curves to be black as well, right? Okay. And so in this case, I could say, go to my isometrics and set that this is just a block, of course, right? If I don't like that ground plane and seeing that that horizon, which looks pretty bad, doesn't it? I mean, that looks awful, right? Like the background. So that's something I can turn off in my render settings. So if I go to my render properties, sorry, they just disappeared. They're over here with the layers, right? Or I can just have them on up here in a window when I turn them on. But they're right here. I can, again, that blue sphere. So I can turn the ground plane off, right? Now you'll notice that suddenly with no ground plane, there's less shadows on the block itself because there's less light reflecting off of places, right? But if I turn the ground plane off and I make my own ground plane with an infinite, let's say try to avoid having that horizon line. Let's see if I can get that to do it. Right. Then suddenly it looks better. So if I wanted to have that soft shadow on the ground, I can just make my own ground if you don't like the way the ground plane looks, because that ground plane can look pretty bad from time to time. One other thing I'll say is that there's, by default, it'll have in the rendering, they'll have the skylight on, which is basically, if you think about our environments, the main source of light when outside, when during the daytime, of course, is the sun. And so you can think about sunlight acting in two different ways, right? So we have direct sunlight. That's the directional rays when that sun is out and there are no clouds. And you get these nice crisp shadows. And when it's striking you, it's really, really warm, right? Especially in the desert. But if you also think about our atmosphere, and the way we see our atmosphere is basically a dome around us. There's dust, there's moisture, sometimes there's clouds that make things very diffuse. In other words, there's light that isn't direct, but is sort of bouncing around and becomes diffuse, right? There's also all the light that's hitting all the objects that we see and bouncing around and bouncing to our eyes, right? The way we see objects is light strikes the object and bounces to our eyes, right? So the skylight sort of takes all of that bouncing diffuse light into consideration. And so you get these sort of soft shadows, these sort of tones. If we wanted to turn on also direct light, like direct sunlight on, we can turn that on as well, right? So, and then you can also turn on the sun settings. You could set your, you can set them manually by giving them an azimuth and altitude, right? Like sort of saying what direction it's coming from directionally on the compass, and then how high in the sky it is, right? Or you could, instead of turn off the manual control, you could actually give it your location, which gives it your latitude, and then give it the time of day and the time of year, and it'll adjust the sun accordingly, right? It'll also say whether you're doing daylight savings or not, right? So mathematically, it's easy for a CAD to sort of figure out where the sun should be if you give it your latitude. And so you could always type in Las Vegas, wherever it is down here. Oops. Las Vegas, Nevada. That'll change the latitude, and you can give it the time of year, which I think we're in June. And you know, you can give it the time of day, and it's sort of right. I know this is covering up the actual box that we're looking at, so yeah, anyway. Okay. If we go in winter, then again, the sun's lower in the sky, so then we start to get deeper shadows on the ground and things like that. There's also an intensity factor for the sun. And you can also do sort of ray trace shadows depending on which render mode you're in. Okay. So I'm going to turn that off and just sort of leave it as soft shadows. It looks kind of nice. Later on, we'll turn on the sun when we're doing some interiors to really sort of look at these things. But if you want to play around with that and play around with the sun direction, feel free. You can just refer back to this video once it's posted. Okay. A lot of these other settings I try not to mess around with if at all possible, because a little small change here can lead to something that just breaks or doesn't work. If you break something, again, look at the bottom, there's a reset to defaults. So I think that's always the key. One last thing, and that is you can hit the render button and it'll bring up its own render box and try to render this thing out, and you can save it. But it's also doing, if you're using, yeah, are you sure you want to stop the rendering? If you're using the regular Rhino render, the contemporary latest Rhino render, it's producing these things in real time for you. And what you can simply do is just go to View, pull down, Capture, to File, and you can save it out as a JPEG or a PNG. If you want a transparent background, although I have a surface for a ground under here, so there won't be any transparency. But you can say, just make sure it's set to the viewport. If you want to change the resolution, you can change the scale right here. Or you can specify a particular custom size. And so, you know, you can hit OK, then ask you what kind of file type you want to save as. Maybe here, let's see. Right, so down here you can say JPEG versus PNG. If you have something where you have a transparent sky and you want to keep that background transparent, you want to make sure you pick PNG, as it'll preserve, or TIFF, because they'll preserve the alpha channels for the transparencies. If you pick JPEG, it'll flatten it and put a black or gray or white background in. But in this case, I can just pick JPEG and do that. And that's another way to sort of save these renderings out. Okay. All right. That was a lot, and it only kind of worked part of the time. So let me stop talking here and let me stop. Someone had a question. What was it?
I was curious about when you're doing the capture, will it still export those shadows if you're doing a transparent background?
Yes, it will. Yeah. Yeah, anytime where you have shadows. So if it's casting shadows, then there's no transparency, right? So just keep that in mind. So if you're trying to, let's say you're making a really sleek, like I think back to, probably several years ago, Apple.com, like they had all their products on a white field. And so it looked like they were floating, but then they had these sort of shadows, like soft shadows, really kind of slick. So you just want to make sure whatever background you're using for your poster or graphic, you'd want to match that with your whatever the shadows were being cast on, and then they would float. So if you're just going to the white piece of paper, white is perfect. Again, if you go to the material library, sorry, let me just go into Rhino here really quickly. Material library, you can always go in and set your own. So if I went to plaster, right, it's going to pull up that shader and I can select it. One of the things you can do is you can change its properties, right? Plaster is kind of a boring one. Sorry, I'm just trying to get the, let me just get this part of zoom out of the way here. Okay, so back in Rhino, I can always change the color. So this is just a really generic flat color, but I could always turn it to something like this. Then I select this object, I can right click on the shader and say assign to the object that's selected. Now it's this cyan teal sort of thing, right? For better or worse. I don't know why you'd want to make something this color, but whatever, it's possible, right? And of course, if you hit the plus sign, you can always import other sort of things, right? So, and some of these things are, if I pick, let's say, plastic, for instance, I go with like, let's say, white, transparent, opaque, plastic, right? We're gonna get something with more gloss, right? So let's just see what happens here when I change it. I can always change the color, but there is reflectivity. And let me just change this to object to this plastic. I can change its color, right? I can change how glossy it is, how transparent it is, or opaque it is, right? I can actually turn its properties down. You can see how reflective it is. Make it flat or glossy, etc. So I can begin to sort of play around with some of the settings here, right? And of course, if you Google shaders for Rhino and Studio Max and SketchUp, you can find shaders that people provided. You can download them, put them in the right folders, and then they're available in your library as well. So we'll do that as we actually start to really deploy these tools in particular ways. You can then it's a question of what battles do you want to fight with the rendering engine versus what battles do you want to fight post-production in Photoshop, right? There's a really interesting shader on here. I think it's like car paint or something. Oh yeah, it's so good. But there's lots of different shaders you can play around with. Really bizarre. Metal, glass. There's architectural ones, ceramics, tile. There's some. They sort of break these down by ceiling, exterior, floor, and roof, and some of them are better than others. Obviously, some of them you don't want to touch at all. They're just bad. Or they're obviously tiled, they sort of repeat, or something like that. But product design, let's see, carbon fiber. That's kind of interesting. Let's see what carbon fiber looks like. I don't know. It looks kind of plain to me. This looks like gray. Oh, I guess it does have this sort of texture on it, like it was laid up with tape or something. Anyway. I kind of just like the hatching that's on that. Carbon fiber is my new favorite shader, I guess, but not because it looks like carbon fiber, just because I like the hatching. All right, anyway. So I'll see you guys, I'll see some of you next week. But the key thing is to produce 5 axons, right? Produce 5 axons, one way or the other, like practice and experiment with rendering and also with the make 2D and with line work. Okay. Yeah, we'll see what you produce, and there'll be the good, the bad, and the ugly. There'll be some experiments. There'll be some experiments that turned out nice and were happy accidents. Some that didn't turn out as nice. But again, remember the mantra is fail early, fail often. Okay. All right. So where we're going with this is the final drafts aren't due on Tuesday, but I want you to have some drafts because on then we'll talk about how in Photoshop and Illustrator we can begin to introduce some scaled entourage, like scale human figures and silhouettes, as well as vegetation, in order to give this thing scale and a sense of place. We'll also try to get inside and start to look at the perspectives. We just didn't have time today because basically everything that could go wrong did for me for whatever reason. So anyway, I apologize for that. I think things will be much better on Monday. They typically, or sorry, Tuesday when we next meet. They typically are. I guess I was due for a letdown demonstration today. Hopefully hopefully that means that the letdown game for hockey doesn't happen tonight either. So anyway, I feel like they're due for a letdown game, I don't know, whatever. But anyway, so I'll see some of you here in a bit at 1:40 for studio. All right. If you have any questions, I'm really easy I'm obsessive compulsive about checking my email when I see the little red icon on my mail app. So yeah, if you have any questions, just shoot me an email. I'm there to help out. And I can always jump onto Zoom with you if we need to. You can share your screen. We can troubleshoot something. Okay. And I'm curious, Nate. I'm hopeful that you're if you run any kind of update for Rhino, that suddenly the rendering looks better. I think it will.
I closed it and opened it again, and it's doing the same thing. So I'm gonna have to look and see how to run the updates on it. I didn't
Okay,
catch
so
how
if you
you
go
did.
to help and you say check for updates, see where my screen help pull down. There's a check for updates.
Okay, gotcha. Yep.
And does yours say it's up to date, or does it say there's a service release?
It says it's up to date.
All right. So you have 7.29.23.107. Service release 29.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. That's interesting. Yeah, I'll just restart my computer. I don't know if that's going to help or anything, but I haven't.
Okay.
So if I have any problems, I'll email you.
Yeah, let me know how it goes at the beginning of studio. We can always talk about it. And again, sorry, we went a little over, but well, I'm going to, as soon as I can close out Zoom, it'll start to process the video. Once it's done processing, I'll upload it to YouTube. Once it's done uploading to YouTube, I'll embed it into Canvas. So I'll get that going right away. Okay.
All right.
Have a great weekend. For those if I don't see you later this afternoon.
All right, thank you. See you.
Thank you.
Ooh, all right. Get this bad. Stop sharing.